David's heart thundered as he stood outside the towering glass building. The name, Harrington Enterprises, glinting in the San Francisco sun, mocking him with its permanence. Yesterday, he'd been the heir to this empire, the son poised to inherit his father's legacy. Today, he was nothing, just a 25-year-old man clutching a crumpled letter that said his father had sold the company and cut him out entirely. The betrayal stung deeper than the autumn chill seeping through his navy blazer. David had spent his life chasing his father's approval, molding himself into the perfect son, Ivy League degree, late nights at the office, and a smile that hid every crack in his soul. But it wasn't enough. Not for Richard Harrington, who'd always looked at David like he was a puzzle missing a piece. He pushed through the revolving doors, the lobby's marble floors echoing under his steps. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight bun, glanced up. "Mr. Harrington? I wasn't expecting you today." "I need to see the new owner," David said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Now." She hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Caldwell is in a meeting, but I'll let him know you're here." Ethan Caldwell. The name burned in David's mind. He'd heard it whispered in boardrooms, a rising star in tech who'd swooped in and bought the company overnight. No one knew much about him, just that he was young, brilliant, and ruthless. David's hands clenched. Whoever this man was, he'd stolen everything David had worked for. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, a sleek office greeted him. Glass walls, modern art, and a view of the Golden Gate Bridge that screamed power. A man stood by the window, his back to David, blonde hair catching the light. He turned, and David froze. Ethan Caldwell was no stranger. Those hazel eyes, that easy smile. David knew them from late nights at underground jazz bars, from stolen kisses in the fog-drenched streets of the Castro. Ethan, the man who'd made David's heart race for the first time in years, was the one who'd taken his future. "David," Ethan said, his voice warm but cautious. "I didn't expect you so soon." "You bought my father's company," David spat, stepping forward. "Did you know who I was when we met? Was this all some game to you?" Ethan's face softened, but his eyes held a flicker of something unreadable. "It's not what you think. Sit down. We need to talk." David didn't move. His pulse roared in his ears, torn between anger and the memory of Ethan's hands on his waist, their laughter mingling in the dark. How could the man who'd made him feel alive be the same one who destroyed his world? "I trusted you," David said, his voice breaking. "And you played me." Ethan took a step closer, his gaze steady. "I never played you, David. I bought this company because I believe in it, and because I believe in you. Your father didn't see your worth. I do." The words hit like a punch, unraveling everything David thought he knew. He wanted to scream, to walk away, but something in Ethan's eyes held him there. A promise, a challenge, a spark of something dangerous and beautiful. David sank into the leather chair across from Ethan's desk, his mind a battlefield. The office smelled of cedar and ambition, a stark contrast to the dive bars where he'd first met Ethan 6 months ago. Back then, Ethan had been a stranger with a quick laugh and a knack for making David forget the weight of his father's expectations. They'd danced around their feelings for weeks, each encounter charged with unspoken desire, until one night under a street lamp, Ethan had pulled David close and kissed him like the world was ending. Now, that same man sat across from him, the new owner of Harrington Enterprises, and David couldn't untangle the knot of betrayal and longing in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" David asked, his voice low. "You knew who I was. You knew what this company meant to me." Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "I wanted to, but you were so guarded, David. Every time we got close, you pulled back, like you were afraid of being seen. I didn't know how to tell you without breaking what we had." David's jaw tightened. Ethan wasn't wrong. Growing up under Richard Harrington's roof had taught him to hide parts of himself, especially the part that loved men. His father had never said the words, but the disdain in his eyes whenever David strayed from the perfect son script was clear enough. Coming out hadn't been an option, not when the company was at stake. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to trust me first," Ethan continued. "Not as the guy who bought your father's company, but as me." David laughed bitterly. "And now you're my boss. How's that for trust?" Ethan's lips quirked, a ghost of the smile David had fallen for. "I don't want to be your boss. I want to be your partner. In this company, and in everything else. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. David's heart raced, but his mind screamed caution. Ethan had power now, power over David's legacy, his future. Could he trust someone who'd kept such a massive secret? Before he could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "It's your father. He's here." David's stomach dropped. Richard Harrington hadn't spoken to him since the sale, hadn't even answered his calls. The thought of facing him now, in this office, with Ethan watching, was unbearable. "Let him come," David said, his voice steel. "If he wants to gloat, let him do it to my face." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But David, this isn't about him anymore. It's about you. What do you want?" The question lingered as the elevator hummed in the distance, signaling Richard's arrival. David didn't have an answer, not yet. But as he braced himself for the confrontation, he felt a spark of defiance ignite. For the first time, he wasn't just Richard Harrington's son. He was David, and he was done hiding. The elevator doors slid open, and Richard Harrington stepped into the office, his presence as commanding as ever. At 60, he was a silver-haired titan in a bespoke suit, his cold gray eyes sweeping the room like he still owned it. David's chest tightened, years of suppressed anger bubbling up at the sight of the man who'd raised him with conditions, not love. "David," Richard said, his tone clipped, as if his son were an inconvenience. "I didn't expect to find you here, groveling to the new owner." The jab landed, but David held his ground. "I'm not groveling. I'm here to understand why you sold the company without a word to me." Richard's lips curled into a smirk. "You weren't ready. You've never been ready. This company needed a leader, not a boy playing at ambition." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Harrington, you sold this company to me because I made the best offer. But let's be clear, David's vision is what made it worth buying." Richard's eyes narrowed, sizing Ethan up. "Caldwell, is it? You're young to be throwing around that kind of money. What's your angle?" David's pulse quickened. He'd spent his life decoding his father's disdain, and he saw it now. The subtle judgment, the assumption that Ethan was just another opportunist. But Ethan didn't flinch. "My angle," Ethan said, "is building something lasting. With David, if he'll have it." The words caught David off guard, a lifeline thrown in the middle of a storm. He glanced at Ethan, searching for the truth in his hazel eyes. Was this real, or was Ethan just playing the game better than Richard ever had? Richard laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think my son can handle this? He's soft, always has been. Couldn't even keep his personal life in check." The veiled reference to David's sexuality hit like a blade. He felt Ethan tense beside him, but David spoke first, his voice steady. "If by personal life you mean who I love, then yeah, I'm done hiding that. And I'm done letting you decide what I'm worth." Richard's face hardened, but before he could respond, Ethan cut in. "Mr. Harrington, you're welcome to stay and discuss the transition. But if you're just here to tear David down, you can leave." The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words settling like dust. Richard stared, unaccustomed to being challenged, then turned on his heel. "You'll regret this, both of you," he said, and the elevator swallowed him whole. David exhaled, his hands trembling. Ethan reached for him, but David stepped back, still reeling. "I need air," he muttered, heading for the rooftop garden. The San Francisco skyline glowed under the setting sun, a tapestry of gold and steel. David leaned against the railing, the city's hum grounding him as he tried to process the day. Ethan followed, keeping his distance, his presence a quiet anchor. "You didn't have to do that," David said finally, his voice raw. "Stand up to him like that." "I wanted to," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "I've seen what he does to you, David. The way he makes you feel small. You're not small. You're brilliant." David's throat tightened. He wanted to believe Ethan, wanted to lean into the warmth of his words, but trust was a fragile thing, and his was still bruised. "You should have told me about the sale. I deserve to know." Ethan nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "You're right. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I should have trusted you to handle it." The honesty disarmed David, chipping away at the walls he'd built. He looked at Ethan, really looked at him. The man who'd seen him at his most vulnerable, who'd kissed him under starlit skies and now stood here, offering him a future he'd never dared to imagine. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan closed the distance between them, his hand brushing David's. I want you to be my partner in every way. I want us to run this company together, to build something that's ours. And I want you to stop hiding who you are, because I'm in love with you, David. The confession stole David's breath. He'd felt it too, in every glance, every touch, but hearing it aloud was like a dam breaking. He reached for Ethan, pulling him close, their foreheads touching as the city faded around them. For the first time, David felt like he could breathe. But the moment was fleeting. His phone buzzed, a text from an old colleague. Your father's planning something. He's not letting go of the company that easily. David's grip on Ethan tightened. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together, but the fight was far from over. The rooftop garden became their sanctuary over the next few weeks, a place where David and Ethan could steal moments away from the chaos of Harrington Enterprises. The company was in flux, with employees whispering about the sale and board members circling like vultures. David threw himself into work, learning the ropes of Ethan's vision for the company, a blend of tech innovation and social impact that felt like a rebellion against his father's cold, profit-driven legacy. But Richard's shadow loomed. The text David had received was just the beginning. Whispers reached him through industry contacts. Richard was rallying old allies, claiming Ethan's acquisition was a fluke, a mistake that could be undone. David felt the weight of his father's vendetta, a reminder that Richard Harrington never lost without a fight. One evening, as David pored over financial reports in Ethan's office, Ethan slid a coffee across the desk, his fingers lingering on David's. You're working too hard, Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. You need to breathe, David. David looked up, exhaustion etched into his features. I can't. Not when he's out there, plotting to take this back. Ethan sat on the edge of the desk, his hazel eyes searching David's. He can try, but this company is ours now. You're not fighting him alone anymore. The words were a balm, but David's fear ran deeper than he could admit. He'd spent his life trying to prove himself to a man who'd never see him as enough. Now, with Ethan by his side, he wanted to believe in a different future, but the past was a heavy chain. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Sarah, Ethan's sharp-witted assistant, poked her head in. There's a board member here to see you. Says it's urgent. David's stomach churned as an older man in a pinstripe suit entered, George Langley, one of his father's oldest allies. George's smile was all teeth, no warmth. David, Ethan, I hope I'm not intruding. Ethan stood, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Not at all, George. What's on your mind? George didn't sit. There's concern among the board about the direction of the company. Some of us feel uneasy about the rapid changes. Richard has been in touch, offering to consult. He believes stability is what we need. David's blood ran cold. This was it, his father's first move. Stability, he said, his voice sharp. You mean going back to cutting corners and prioritizing profits over people? George raised an eyebrow. Careful, David. You sound like you're picking a fight you can't win. Ethan stepped in, his tone calm but unyielding. The board approved the sale. If there's a problem, we address it together, not through back channels with Richard. George's smile faded. We'll see what the board decides at the next meeting. Good luck, gentlemen. He left, the air in the room heavier than before. David turned to Ethan, his voice low. He's not bluffing. My father's got half the board in his pocket. If they push a vote, we could lose control. Ethan's hand found David's, squeezing gently. Then we fight smart. We show them what we're capable of, together. That night, David couldn't sleep. He stood on his apartment balcony, the city lights blurring as his mind raced. Ethan's faith in him was a lifeline, but doubt gnawed at his edges. What if he wasn't enough? What if Richard was right, and he'd never been cut out for this? His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Ethan, texting a single line. Meet me at the rooftop. I have an idea. David arrived to find Ethan waiting, a laptop open on a small table, the screen glowing with a presentation. What's this? David asked, curiosity cutting through his fatigue. Ethan grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. Our counterattack. We're going to pitch a new direction for the company, one that'll make the board see your father's way as obsolete. They worked through the night, crafting a vision that blended David's intimate knowledge of the company with Ethan's innovative tech strategies. It was bold, sustainable initiatives, community outreach, and cutting-edge AI to streamline operations. By dawn, they had a plan that felt like a declaration of war. As the sun rose, Ethan pulled David close, their breath mingling in the cool morning air. "We're going to win this," Ethan whispered. "Not just for the company, but for us." David nodded, his heart swelling with something stronger than fear, hope. For the first time, he felt like he was fighting for something bigger than his father's approval. He was fighting for himself, for Ethan, for the life they could build together. But as they prepared for the board meeting, a new message arrived, this time from an anonymous source. "Check your father's offshore accounts. He's hiding something." David's blood ran cold. The game had just gotten bigger, and the stakes were higher than ever. David stared at the anonymous message, his pulse hammering. Offshore accounts? His father had always been meticulous, a master at covering his tracks. If there was truth to this, it could change everything. But it could also be a trap. He showed the message to Ethan, whose eyes narrowed as he read it. "We need to dig into this," Ethan said, his voice low. "But we have to be careful. If Richard catches wind, he'll bury it deeper." David nodded, his mind racing. He'd spent years navigating his father's world, learning the unspoken rules of power. Richard Harrington didn't make mistakes, unless his pride got in the way. And David was betting it had. They enlisted Sarah, who had a knack for discreet research, to trace the lead. While she worked, David and Ethan prepared for the board meeting, their presentation polished to perfection. But the weight of the anonymous tip hung over them, a ticking clock they couldn't ignore. The boardroom was a battlefield when they arrived. The table was lined with stern faces, George Langley at the head, his smirk barely concealed. David's heart pounded, but Ethan's steady hand on his shoulder grounded him. They were in this together. Ethan took the lead, his voice commanding as he unveiled their vision. A company that prioritized innovation, sustainability, and community impact. David watched the board's reactions shift. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others, loyal to Richard, crossed their arms. When it was David's turn, he spoke from the heart. "I grew up in this company," he said, his voice steady. "I know its strengths, its flaws, and its potential. My father built it on profit. We'll build it on purpose." A murmur rippled through the room. George's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Bold words, David. But can you deliver? Your father's offering to return as a consultant, to stabilize things." David's fists clenched under the table. "My father sold this company because he didn't believe in me. Ethan does, and I believe in him." The room fell silent, the weight of David's defiance palpable. Ethan's eyes met his, a silent promise passing between them. They were a team, unbreakable, even as the board deliberated. After the meeting, Sarah pulled them aside, her face grim. "I found something," she whispered, handing them an encrypted drive. "Your father's been funneling money through offshore accounts for years. It's tied to a shell company, shady deals, maybe even fraud." David's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about the company anymore. If Richard was involved in something illegal, exposing it could destroy him, but it could also drag Harrington Enterprises down with him. "What do we do?" David asked, his voice barely audible. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We verify it. If it's true, we use it, not to destroy him, but to protect what's ours." That night, David and Ethan pored over the files Sarah had uncovered. The evidence was damning. Invoices, bank transfers, emails linking Richard to questionable deals. David felt sick, not just at his father's betrayal of the company, but at the realization that the man he'd spent his life trying to please was a fraud. Ethan reached for his hand, his touch a quiet anchor. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "But whatever you choose, I'm with you." David looked at him, the man who'd turned his world upside down in every possible way. "Why are you doing this, Ethan? You could have walked away, kept the company, left me behind." Ethan smiled, soft and unguarded. "Because I see you, David. The real you. And I'm not going anywhere." The words broke something in David, a wall he'd built to survive his father's rejection. He leaned in, kissing Ethan with a desperation that felt like coming home. The world outside could wait, for now. It was just them, two men fighting for a future they could both believe in. But the next morning, reality crashed back. A news alert pinged on David's phone. Harrington Enterprises under investigation for financial misconduct. Richard had made his move, leaking just enough to the press to cast doubt on Ethan's leadership, while keeping his own hands clean. David's blood boiled. His father was playing dirty, and now the company, their company, was at risk. He turned to Ethan, his voice resolute. We need to fight back. No more waiting. Ethan nodded, a glint of determination in his eyes. Then let's expose him. All of it. The news cycle was relentless. Headlines screamed about Harrington Enterprises, painting Ethan as an inexperienced upstart and David as a disgraced heir. Richard's fingerprints were all over it, a calculated strike to undermine their leadership. David felt the walls closing in, but Ethan's calm resolve kept him grounded. They met with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla who specialized in corporate law. She reviewed the offshore account files, her expression growing graver with each page. This is explosive, she said. If you go public, Richard's done, but it'll hurt the company's stock. Are you prepared for that? David hesitated. Harrington Enterprises was more than a business. It was his legacy, the one thing he'd clung to through years of his father's disdain. But Ethan's hand on his shoulder reminded him of what he stood to gain, a future built on truth, not lies. Do it, David said finally. He doesn't get to control us anymore. Carla nodded, already drafting a statement. I'll coordinate with the SEC. This needs to be airtight. As she worked, Ethan pulled David aside. You're sure about this? Once we go down this road, there's no turning back. David met his gaze, his heart steady for the first time in weeks. I'm sure. I want a life with you, Ethan. Not his shadow. Ethan's smile was a quiet victory, and David felt the weight of his choice settle, not with fear, but with freedom. The press conference was a blur of flashing cameras and shouted questions. David stood at the podium, Ethan at his side, as Carla presented the evidence. Years of Richard's financial misconduct, hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies. The room erupted, reporters scrambling to break the story. David's voice was steady as he spoke. My father built this company, but he lost sight of what it could be, he said. Ethan and I are here to rebuild it. Honestly, openly, for everyone who believes in its future. The fallout was immediate. Richard's allies on the board distanced themselves, and the SEC launched a formal investigation. By evening, Richard was trending on social media, his reputation in tatters. David felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache for the father he'd never truly had. That night, they retreated to the rooftop garden, the city lights a quiet backdrop to their exhaustion. Ethan wrapped an arm around David, pulling him close. You did it, he murmured. You stood up to him. David leaned into him, the warmth of Ethan's body chasing away the chill. We did it. But it's not over. The company's taking a hit. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. We'll rebuild. Together. The board's with us now, and the employees trust you. We've got a chance to make this right. David looked out at the skyline, the weight of the past weeks settling into something new. Hope, fragile but real. He turned to Ethan, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a promise. For the first time, David wasn't defined by his father's legacy. He was building his own. But as they stood together, a new message arrived, this time from Richard himself. You think you've won, David? You've only started a war. David's heart sank, but Ethan's grip tightened. Let him try, Ethan said, his voice fierce. We're ready. The war Richard promised came swiftly. He didn't fight with lawsuits or boardroom tactics. He fought with whispers, leveraging his old connections to sow doubt among investors. Stock prices wavered, and nervous whispers filled the office. David and Ethan worked tirelessly, meeting with stakeholders, reassuring employees, and rolling out their first major initiative, a community-driven tech hub that earned praise but strained their resources. David felt the pressure like a vice, but Ethan was his anchor. Their nights were spent planning, strategizing, and stealing moments of intimacy that kept them sane. One evening, as they lay tangled in Ethan's apartment, David traced the lines of Ethan's jaw, marveling at how far they'd come. I don't know if I could have done this without you, he admitted. Ethan kissed his forehead. You could have, but I'm glad you don't have to. Their bond grew stronger, a quiet defiance against Richard's campaign. But the older man wasn't done. A week later, a tabloid ran a story outing David, complete with grainy photos of him and Ethan together. The headline screamed, Harrington heir's secret romance threatens company's future. David's hands shook as he read it, the violation cutting deep. He'd never hidden his feelings for Ethan, but having them splashed across headlines felt like a theft. Ethan, furious, called Carla to trace the leak. It didn't take long to confirm Richard's involvement. "He's trying to break us," David said, his voice hollow. Ethan's eyes blazed. "Then we don't break. We show the world who we are, proud, unapologetic, and in charge." They decided to fight fire with fire. David wrote an open letter, published on the company's website, owning his truth. "I'm David Harrington, and I'm gay," he wrote. "I'm also the man fighting to save this company alongside my partner, Ethan Caldwell. Our love doesn't weaken us. It makes us stronger." The response was overwhelming. Employees rallied, posting messages of support. Social media buzzed with praise, and the stock began to stabilize. David's honesty had turned Richard's weapon against him, proving that vulnerability could be power. Months later, Harrington Enterprises stood stronger than ever. The tech hub launched to acclaim, and the board unanimously backed David and Ethan's leadership. Richard, facing SEC charges, faded into irrelevance, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own deceit. David and Ethan stood on the rooftop garden, now their tradition, watching the city glow under a starlit sky. David felt lighter, unburdened by the ghosts of his father's expectations. He turned to Ethan, his heart full. "We did it," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just the company. Us." Ethan smiled, pulling him close. "This is just the beginning. We've got a whole future to build." Their kiss was a vow, a celebration of everything they'd fought for. David had lost his father's legacy, but he'd gained something far greater, a life where he could love openly, lead boldly, and stand as his true self. The company was theirs now, not just in name, but in spirit. And as they looked out at the city, hand in hand, David knew they'd face whatever came next, together.